Everybody, hello and welcome to the live stream version of the Bold Business Podcast. You're in the right place for conversations about how to increase the capacity of not only yourself, not only your leadership team, your entire company. This program is about the skills that we need to lead a resilient business. And boy, do we need that more than ever before. It's sometimes called the messy middle. It's sometimes called the squishy parts. It's always called when we put the effort in, we get results. So with that, I am excited to introduce you to both Mike and Steve. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I started one of the world's first digital agencies in the 90s, worked for IBM as their e-visionary around the dot-com boom, started Story Miners in 2002. I can go deeper.
Go a little deeper.
We have a new dog. No.
Yes! I want to see pictures. Where is it?
He'll pop in just a second, not to worry.
Excellent. Okay.
So what drives me professionally, it was always about language, because I learned to speak languages when I was a kid as an exchange student. And when you speak a foreign language, you also have to learn to speak the culture and read the body language and understand the rituals and the rhythms. And that made me a really good human observer. So that parlayed very well into my skills as a customer experience designer, which is what I've been doing for the last 20 years. I did some pioneering work at IBM with McDonald's, Wingate Inns, a bunch of others where we applied design thinking and human acting, and we made experiences from scratch, but we made them on brand and we made them work. And a lot of that came from just listening to other people and being able to be empathetic to them. Now what we do is we've combined that with a little bit more systems thinking to help leaders get really clear on their strategies and earn the buy-in so that their ideas can become real. I'm a big believer that everybody should see their ideas come real, because it's an amazing feeling and it really helps you progress.
All right, Steve, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I think Mike, having never met me before, actually described me very well on LinkedIn yesterday. He described me as a building architect who has transitioned to becoming a culture architect. And I think that's very, very well said. I do come from the world of architecture, but soon realized very much in the words of Winston Churchill, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. And I felt that was so apropos also to the idea of shaping and being shaped by culture. So I'm the founder of Culture Design Studio, and I act as a culture design strategist, a speaker, and a podcaster. And I love the deep work. I love the deep work of organizational change, personal leadership change, and that's what really floats my boat.
And I'm your host, Jess Duell.
And Jess, when was the last time people heard a little bit about your backstory? Because you've been doing this for a while. Maybe we can share a little bit for the new listeners.
I have the little canned piece, but I love that. I'm gonna totally leave that off because people get to hear that all the time. Thanks, Mike. My backstory is I accidentally became who I am today because of every interaction that I had that I showed up to with curiosity, which has not only driven the decisions that I have made as a person, the amazing successes, the stunning failures, and everything in between about how people work together and the space between us that is necessary to come together to not only hear great ideas, listen to great ideas, but to actually use each other's energy and each other's concepts and each other's problems that they see from their perspectives to drive conversation that moves businesses forward. I do have a dog. My favorite color is yellow. And if you very rarely see me without this Colorado teacup that is gigantic, I have one with an elk on it.
Very specific. Love it.
Oh, this is the biggest cup I have ever seen in my life. It's bigger than the biggest thing you can get at a coffee shop, and I put mate tea in it. Are you coffee or tea drinkers, gentlemen?
I'm a coffee drinker here.
Ooh, in a fancy glass. Is that a double layered one?
It's one of those barista grade glasses, and so I drink mine black, and so it just makes it feel more fancy.
I love it. Black fancy coffee. And you held up something, Mike.
I did. I am a cold water drinker, so and a single-use plastic recycler. So
yes. After 12 o'clock, I'm also a water drinker. No more caffeine for me. Oh goodness. Watch me in the mornings.
You haven't had any yet, have you?
No, actually, I'm on my first cup of this great, amazing tea. I actually have this fantastic meeting on Tuesday mornings with a local business to business networking group called Firestorm. And I live in Boulder, Colorado. And the Boulder chapter is such a great group of people. I think we could sit around and all not say anything, and I would come away this hyped. And so on the days that we have great conversation, like we did today, I can only imagine what is like exuding off of me as I leave that, prepare for this, and here we go.
You're having a good day. And if you want an even bigger cup, you have to drive across the state of Texas like I did on my way to graduate school. Everything is big, including the coffee cups.
That's my joke. Everything is bigger in Texas except my Colorado cup. Okay, I love that. Now, we're going to jump in to the gritty realness with a ton of information. Everybody that is listening, everybody that is watching, guess what? I have asked Steve and Mike to come prepared specifically to answer a question that, by the way, you are answering on social media as well. There is a poll out there on Twitter and LinkedIn that make sure to stop by and share your thoughts, because when you share your thoughts and your ideas, we want to feature what you have to say and what you've learned, because it takes all of us together to continue to learn. I have to tell you, I'd much rather learn from your failures so I don't have to have them, because I do have enough of my own that I would love to share and be able to help you avoid those as well. So keep this conversation going. It's a big part of what it is. And the question is, Mike, constant change is our reality. How can businesses adapt?
Here's my answer. And first of all, constant change is a reality. Brilliant setup. How can businesses adapt? Let's tease that apart a little bit. What are businesses made of? People. So people have these limits to change. And if you can increase their aperture for change, the business can change more easily. One of the things that most people think about when they think about change is these huge reorganizations. And those happen every once in a while. So everybody changes, and then there's this new normal. This idea of constant change requires something different. It requires little adjustments to the business system all the time. So you're constantly innovating. It's almost like doing a software scrum. You're doing version 1.1, 1.2, 1.2.1, 1.2.2, and on and on. So to make that switch, the one thing leaders have to do and thinkers have to do is replace their closed systems thinking with open systems thinking. So instead of thinking of your strategy as, I know my inputs and I know my outputs, leave a little bit of room for information from the outside, changing customer requests, new news, competitor moves, things like that, to always affect what you're doing. If you're the leader, there's something else that you have to do to change in your thinking in order to get to that goal of changing continuously. And that's that you have to learn design thinking. It goes by many names, but the point is, instead of focusing on only one thing, like we're going to grow sales or we're going to be more efficient, you can think about how the changes that you make to your strategy and your operations give multiple stakeholders the benefit. So instead of one person winning everything at the expense of everyone else, like a Monopoly game, your job is to raise the tide in the bay so that your boat goes up, your customers' boats go up, your employees and your partners, and those all go up. And the last thing I'd say is the strategic shift in your mindset about strategy has to go from sacrosanct, where, look, I said this is what the strategy is, and you guys better follow it. I'm going to grade you on how well you follow it. You've got to keep a more permeable membrane around the outside of the organization and between you and the folks that you work with. You've got to be moved to being more iterative. So you never have a final strategy. You're always making steps in that direction and learning in the way. So if you can put learning capabilities into your business, and if you can make learning a valued thing, instead of just growing bigger, you'll start to realize that learning faster is the way to go. And when you do that, you know that your culture is moving in the right direction, and so is your business.
Thank you, Mike. All right, Steve. Constant change is our reality. How can businesses adapt?
Yeah, I think, Mike, I really appreciate what you just shared. I think we think very much alike. So you covered a couple of things but better. You said it better than I was going to say it. So I'll add some other thoughts. When I think of how to adapt to change in terms of companies, I can think of maybe three things. I think of the capability or the skill, the soft skill of empathy. I think of the ability to communicate well. And I think a little bit of what Mike talked about was the skill of agility, or having the capability to be agile. So when I think of empathy, there's so much a part of this is understanding that you as a leader, there's this thing that we would call a change journey. It's almost like if you were to graphically show what the journey, the ups and downs of that journey might look like. There are ups and downs. And I think a lot of times when change is going to happen and you communicate that change, the leaders many times are already further down that journey. And so when they share this news, being able to have the empathy to know that people many times are going to be at different stages along that stage journey, and really trying to understand what are they feeling at that given time, what is the type of communication that they might need. What type of audience are they? Are they a champion of change? Are they a fence sitter of that change? Or even are they a cynic of that change, and finding different ways to be able to relate to those folks? And I think also the idea of, many times when you think of change, we think of fear. But I think if we can even dissect a little bit more closely what kind of fear might take place, and one of the things we talk about is the loss. There's different types of loss that people experience. It might be the loss of pride. It might be the loss of control, the loss of familiarity, the loss of many different things that people might be feeling. And it's important for a leader to identify what types of loss might they be feeling with this change, but what types of loss might their teams be feeling, and being able to address it. Because I think too many times we just see people's sort of resistance to change as sort of rebellion or pushback. But I think if we're able to take the time to really dissect what kind of loss are they feeling, and where they're at in that journey, that will really help us as leaders. I think the second thing about communication, which I touched upon a little bit, there's no such thing as over communication. And I think even treating communication as a prototype in itself. Many times when we're trying to, if we do understand our audience, then we try to tailor our communication to them. But many times it will land not well, or it won't land well. And so taking feedback, being able to take vulnerable, transparent, authentic feedback, and being able to continue to hone your message as you go throughout the process, that is really helpful. And I think the third one is agility, and just being able to develop a muscle of being able to try new things. It's like if you haven't played golf in a long time and you play golf, you're sore the next day in areas of muscles that you didn't realize you had. And that's because you haven't exercised those well. So I think being able to, or the ability to be agile, to be able to respond to things on the fly, that's something that not people are accustomed to. But there are ways of building that up. So I think those are three areas that I think of just in a quick response.
This is fantastic. And I did ask for a quick response. 2 minutes is a little difficult, especially when we talk and speak and go for days, and then, or a day, maybe even down to a half a day, to put something together that is as succinct as the two of you shared today. It does take thought. And it's one of the reasons in my design thinking for making sure to highlight the best of you being here. So that's fantastic. And thank you for that. Okay, I'm going to jump right in because there were so many things that were said that I want to focus on. And I'm going to ask some general questions, and I'm going to ask some specific questions. So whether we end up using our dog or experiences with our team, or when we went to the grocery store last, all of those things are fair game, because to the point of this lifelong learning, to the point of learning culture that you both have been speaking about, we can look for it everywhere. So I want to start with this. When was the last, okay, so, you know, when did you last consciously choose to build a new skill, and what was it? And how did you begin?
I'll respond first, and I think this has been a really big turning point for me. There was a point where I was really confident in the job that I was in. I was a VP, and I had thought that I felt so good about my momentum in my career. I literally thought that I was going to become the CEO of that company at some point, that I would be tapped, that oh, Steve, you're the next person. A couple of months later, I was laid off from that job. And I had to come face to face with some blind spots that it was kind of like an overcompensation of some of my areas of strength. I kind of leaned in really hard in those areas. And in fact, I had one person that told me, Steve, you have a passion that fires people up, but it also burns people out. So I went into a season of self-reflection and self-awareness. So for me, my answer is is self-awareness, of being able to kind of do that deep work of understanding who you are in terms of what are the strengths that you do bring to the table, but also come face to face with some of those shadows that lurk inside of us. And many times they are let me put it this way, being that it's May the 4th, it's the dark side of our light. It's when you lean into being charismatic, if you don't handle that well, if you kind of in your weakest point, there are also some repercussions that if you lean too hard. And so you can be persuasive or you can be a bully. So I think that there are some things that I had to learn. And I think part of that was a journey of just reaching out to people and asking them the hard questions about yourself. What am I good at? What do I need to work on? What do I take for granted? And I think even if that process, like in my case, it left me sick to my stomach for a couple of weeks as I had to face those blind spots, but really approaching that with vulnerability and also a certain degree, I'll say it, a certain degree of courage to be able to face those things, but wanting to really grow in those areas. And I think for me, that gave me a great sense of empathy, but also affirmation about myself, even if it was some of those negative things that I needed to work on. And that really caused me to grow in a tremendous way. So I felt that what I learned was, even though my vision had been to help organizations undergo transformation and to help individual leaders at those companies undergo their own transformation, what I didn't count on was that I myself was going to have to undergo transformation before I could help the leaders who help then the companies. So that's the idea of self-awareness, that deep work of being able to leverage success later is a big thing for me.
And now you're ready for CEO because you're not afraid to do the change work on yourself first. Good for you.
That's all I got is a happy dance for that one, Mike. You took the words right out of my mouth. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Well, I'll take that question a little differently. On StoryMiner's website, we publish our business model so that everybody can see it. And part of that's to have a reason for being. Part of that is principles. And under the principles area, we list the things that if we don't do, they destroy our ability to create value for our clients. So it's a way that we kind of keep everybody on the same page. One of those things in particular, I think, is germane for this question. It's that every time we do a project, after we've done all the negotiations and stuff like that, we ask the client, all right, in addition to trading services for cash, what is it that you'd like from us? What would you like to learn? What would you like your people to learn? What would you like to know a little bit better? So we piggyback something new that people get to learn on every single project. We also do that internally, although not as regularly. And what that does is it creates kind of a way that people can kind of work better together for each other getting better. And it doesn't cost anything extra. It's like an extra currency. You don't have to negotiate for it because you have an unlimited supply of ability to teach. Now, it does take some time, and you do want to focus your learnings. So to take a look at how powerful this is, imagine that you're doing a startup right now, and you've got two options. You're going to do this deal with a company to get your new product invented, and they're going to say, all right, what would you like to learn? COBOL or an OpenStack? Well, gee, is that going to be kind of hard to decide? It can really, over time, change the trajectory of your entire company.
Yes, it can.
Yeah. So what I did is I tried to practice myself. So the thing that I did, and this is very nuts and bolts, is it's not as as cool and philosophical as what Steve just said. But I realized that I needed to upgrade the look of the way we come across online. So behind me is all this gear and fold down papers and stuff like that. But I decided to follow a friend of mine who's a cardiac surgeon. And he taught me about read one, watch one, do one. And if you watch some of the medical shows on TV, occasionally, there's an intern in there doing some fancy brain surgery a little early, and that causes some problems. But so I read about it and I looked for other people's best practices. But I know from experience that copying best practices is kind of the fastest way to get to third place. Right? Yeah. Best practices, by the time you get to where everybody else is, they've already moved on. So you're always going to be following. The trick, whenever you're learning something new, is to find out what it is that you need to be better. So that's the advice part of what I have to say. So I looked at a bunch of articles, I watched some videos, and then I did one. And I did some podcasts with some friends. I shot some video. I got out my old gear. I played with it. Failure after failure after failure. But I remembered, and this is a word that I love that Steve said, it was season. And seasons always pass. Things will always get better. So after that, I just started doing them. So I remember the first time I pushed the live button, it was a little bit scary, even for a guy who's done lots and lots of speaking. So read one, watch one, do one, and you have to pick your learning journey on purpose. And what I wanted was an on-brand extension, a digital extension of a StoryMiner's on-brand experience. And that's what's guided me. So now that I've got my studio the way I like it, of course, I can already taste, what I can do. So there you go.
Oh, super great. So Steve, you came from this concept of conceptual and perception. Mike, you came from this place of structure. So I'm going to add a place of behavior. And the first thing that popped, and I don't know why this popped up into my head, but it's totally true also in terms of the commitment that it needs and the behaviors to take what Steve said and to take what Mike said and actually understand the feelings and the experiences in it, which is potty train your kid or a dog. That right there, that is a commitment to be made. I don't want to change diapers the rest of my life. And so this was literally the action that came up. I am committed to helping my child be the best human they can. And this has to become second nature. But boy, oh boy, did I dread waking up every day. Did I hate doing laundry 10 times a day? And that was 10 times, my half of the laundry was 10 times a day. So when you're doing all of this work and you have, I said the word hate, frustration and anger, and all of these things build up. And so regardless of whatever path we are on, when we recognize we have those emotions, those types of sharp ones, the ones that we tend not to talk about, those can be our cues for is it time yet? Do I need a little more power? So I should be a little more frustrated for a while, and then actually make a decision to do something different or have a creative idea and get a breakthrough. Because I'm not sure about you two, but I have great ideas come from meditation and showers and walks in nature, but I have breakthroughs from frustration and anger and difficult. You relate to that?
Totally. I love the way that you said that you choose what to do. And I also like that you decided to use diapers on the kid instead of that was definitely the right way to go.
I am on board with everything you just said, because I do think that it's in those times of that messy middle, those seasons, as we're using that word, of the valley, the trough, the dip, whatever we want to call it. I do think that those are the greatest moments of transformation that we can experience, because we don't learn at the mountain peak. We don't. I think we can sometimes rest on our laurels. I've always, one of the jobs that I learned the most in was actually during the housing crisis. I was in a real estate development at that time, and I had just gotten a P&L role at this national home builder. And it's at the top. It was at the top of the market when I got that role. And so the remaining, or the next 5 years was in the state of decline. I actually learned more during that time about business, about marketing, about sales in the hardest of markets that, in recent experience, because we actually had to do things well. We couldn't rely on the froth of the market. We couldn't rely on gimmicks. We literally had to be good salespeople. We had to be good marketers. We had to be good financial leaders. And so I think it's in those times that we're experiencing those things when we do achieve that breakthrough. But I think there is a mindset that we also need to have during that time. We can't just be down on our luck and just moan and groan and complain. We actually do have to see that this is where the hard work is done. In fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, I've heard so many references saying that that it was going to be in this pandemic that the true leaders were going to rise to the top. It's almost this quote. I don't know who said it, but it says that generals are made during wartime. Mm-hmm. It's like that's when they rise to the top. And I think for us as leaders to lean in to these hard times, lean into that frustration, lean into that discouragement, lean into that overwhelm, and have those be triggers. It's almost like intellectual, emotional triggers, just like our body sends signals in the form of pain. Something's wrong. Something needs to be done. You need to take care of this. You need to pay attention to this. So when we have those negative emotions, let those be sort of triggers to our leadership brain that it's time to lean in, and actually we're going to see the most growth in response.
Hear, hear. I want to build on what you said, Steve. I think that so far our conversation has been very 360, but it's also been very about us, as leaders and the people that we're listening to. I think it's really important for a period, for a time of constant change, for that wartime where leaders are born, and also for that learning principle that I talked about before, that we remember that other people are looking to us. Yeah. They're watching how we act to be an example for how they should model themselves. So while we're going through the struggles of leadership, so is everybody else, even if they don't have a title of leader. So the more that we can be aware of how we're coming across to others, being vulnerable, showing that we're struggling, but also doing it in a way that is good input for other people, the better. And one last thing. We've all talked about, each of the three of us has talked about sometimes how it's been really hard personally and emotionally and stuff like that. If you're open to it and if you have the right person, I'd like people listening to consider bring in someone who's your junior by at least a generation, or maybe even skip a generation, and talk to them openly about how you're feeling and what you're going through. They usually have a very different perspective of the world. And for me, the folks who have been younger have been the ones who see the world from a more simplistic perspective, just when I need to have my breakthrough. And then they feel they've just had an experience of helping the boss, and that just raises and elevates them and makes them feel honored and admired as well.
You are listening to the live stream of the Bold Business Podcast, where we're talking about change. Not only change, constant change. Not only constant change, but the need to adapt. And with me today is Mike Wittenstein of StoryMiners.com and Steve Chaparro, Culture Design Studio. And on that note, about halfway through, we're a little more than halfway through, I did want to turn this on our heads, because we have to, I'm a big believer of holding that mirror up first. Mm-hmm. And I came up with a mantra, changing all those diapers. Everything lasts 2 weeks. I don't know if you've ever, it doesn't matter. An adult person, a teenage person, somebody elderly in their life, we can all experience change as quickly as 2 weeks. And so if we are willing to wait 2 weeks from the time we notice something that annoys us, we don't like, we're worried about, time becomes more on our side. And we can actually flip that around to Steve's points and to Mike's points about how do we have that conversation that's bigger than us? How do we have that conversation with multiple perspectives? And even more important, how do we lead our companies? And how do we make choices that everybody has a chance to participate in, and building this concept of, I don't know if it's called broad decision-making, there's probably a name for it, but being able to create this culture of learning so that people can take action exactly where they're at, try something out, come up with this concept, and then be able to present it. Hey, I saw this problem, I did this thing, I saw this output, I think it's scalable. And here's who it serves, and here's why I did it in the first place. Because usually the people solving the problems are not thinking about how to make their own work better. They're thinking about how to make the people they serve better. They're thinking about how do I add value to the company? And I think that's a big part of it. And so my question, and I guess it's a question, it's kind of like a statement / let's go here next thing is, well, solving the right problem at the right time actually becomes an incredibly important skill when we're thinking about design thinking and iteration and empowering the people around us to also take action. What are your thoughts on that?
I want Steve to go first because that's the classical architectural problem. What do you do with this building? How do you define its shape? It depends on what's going on inside. So Steve, take that one away.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's something that I learned straight away in architecture school. I mean, this was the beginning in the early 90s when we were beginning to use CAD, but they still taught us how to manually draft. But they always taught us never begin your design with a preconceived notion of what the end design will look like. So they said, here's as simple as they taught us. They said, when you approach a design problem, number one, solve for the right problem, because too many times clients will come to us and say, oh, we need a building that meets this need, that is of these dimensions, that is laid out this way. And being, the experienced architects that we are, we always say, okay, hold on. Before we begin with the end in mind, let's truly understand what it is that you need. What is, even the idea of what is the value proposition of your building. Even as we go back into the office, the value proposition of the office is going to be very different than it has been in the past. But we really try to look at what is the right problem to solve, and then how do we actually solve it. So design thinking, we're talking about design thinking, we're talking about co-creation, but the idea of even drawing a solution is they taught us, take a blank sheet of paper and draw one line. You don't have to have it figured out. Draw one line. That one line will inspire the next line, which will inspire the next line. And the process and solution, the process will allow the best solution to emerge. And so whether you're doing that as a sole architect or whether you're doing that as a leader, acting as a facilitator or a co-creator of change, then you're inviting people into that process. So not only are you relying on your preconceived notion, you're not relying on your sole genius, if you have it, but you are allowing an emergent process to allow that to happen, but you're inviting other people in. I believe many times when you invite people into the process, you will achieve greater innovation, greater ownership, greater engagement, greater solutions than you ever have done, even if you are a genius. Because there are so many things that happen as part of this process when you move in that direction. So there's so many lessons to learn, whether it's in leadership or even just life, about the idea of how do you dissolve for the right problem, how do you identify the right problem, and then how do you create the best solution for that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Jess, yes or no? Do you love that?
I do.
So I'm going to ask you a question. And Steve, I so believe in what you're saying. I know it's true. But Jess, you've had a bunch of people on this podcast.
I have.
How does your audience face like that financially minded CIO, CEO, CFO, anything? Oh, it's really
right.
CBOC, Chief Bean Counter Officer. I want to know what my return is going to be before I start. I want to know that we're going to make more money. Let's start with efficiency because that's more important. Let's start with operations and process because that's what holds this place together. That's how we got here. How do you how do you set up what Steve said to actually happen in an environment where things are so like grind the creativity out of you oriented?
Boy, don't they grind the creativity out of you. It's there's two words that pop into my head just right off the cuff: question, assumptions. And the way you set it up, I'm going to go back to something that you said, Mike, which is you said that something along, of course, now that I said you said it and it was right here, it is now floated away. So hang on. It'll come back.
And now a word from our sponsor.
I was going to say improvise, whatever you want to say. It may not come back. But okay, so let's see. If we go back to question, assumptions. And we're talking about not knowing the end in mind. Mm-hmm. Oh, aha, I got it. Which is, thank you, all of these pieces, which is, it's the quickest way to third place. I'm going to quote you on that, Mike.
There you go.
It comes full circle right back here. So I'm not sure if that's where you were leading us, but this is where I have taken us. And the point is, the more rigid we are, the more behind we're going to be. And then we wait so much for that efficiency. And not to say that it's not important. We have to have certain metrics in place. Don't get me wrong. We also have to have that wiggle room, because we can't iterate if we're always stuck in the same process. And it doesn't matter if, my favorite analogy is a bowling lane. It doesn't matter what our goal is at the end. It matters that we know where the gutters are and that we have filled them. So we have everybody and all of their efforts moving us down that path, sometimes fast and we get a strike, sometimes slow and it stalls in the middle, and sometimes bouncing off each side. All those times, though, create those spaces for iteration and allow us to go, oh, I didn't realize we were thinking like this. Oh, we weren't listening close enough to that customer. Oh, we kind of missed the boat when all of our competition did this.
Yeah.
Oh, here's an opportunity that I know that keeps coming up in these meetings that our people are hearing, and we're not doing anything about. So question assumptions with all that in between.
Cool. Well, what you made me think of when you said filling the gutters was the way I bowl, because I fill the gutters with my bowling ball. But then my kids, they bowl better than I do because they have these things called like baby bumper guards.
Baby bumpers. That's right.
And I think of that as like cultural guidelines for folks. Yes. That's where the design comes in. It's like, here's the right path. You may get a 1 or a 10, but at least you're going to knock down some pins. What do you guys think about this? You're in a situation where you've got some luminary leaders like Steve and Jess, and then you've got these bean counter folks who also have the best interests of shareholders in the company in mind and in their own way. And you're trying to bring all that stuff together because we're switching from a time of wreak havoc on the organization once every 5 years and after you hire a consultancy and go to a more continuous model. What do you think about deciding how you decide? Calling out the idea that as we move forward and we're going to tackle this new thing, like where we're going to put our new plant or how we're going to change our service model for COVID or whatever it is, that we're going to have a conversation that's not about the answer. It's not about the question. It's just about how we're going to decide. So this one's going to be, majority wins. This one's going to be benevolent dictatorship because we have a privately owned company. This one's going to be something else. How does that strike you guys?
Well, I'm all about the deciding to decide. And what I have found over the years is every single company does it differently. They may use some serious common signposts and guideposts. However, again, it goes back to holding up that mirror and filling up those gutters. When that is actually done, we get to see how decisions are actually made, and we get to see the results of those decisions. And now it becomes not something that's happening, but something that we can measure and see and make change with. Yeah. So how about you, Mike? And you answer this particular question.
I love that conversation with clients. It is really weird to have. Yeah. Let's decide how we're weird. What planet did you learn English on is kind of the response that I get with people's faces. Like, what do you mean? Well, there are different ways you can decide. And then you have to talk about the benefits of each one. And you have to create the behavior, like you talked about and like Steve alluded to before, of doing things in a different order. So before you tackle a big strategy problem or decide to build this new warehouse thing or whatever it was, you have to decide, how are we going to decide whether we go forward or not?
Right.
Is it going to be collaboration? Is it going to be everybody gets to be heard, but then only the leadership gets to decide? Is it going to be participative? Is it going to be more Japanese consensus building? And you basically, it forces the company to develop a library of decisioning techniques. And what happens is when you have those conversations up front about how you're going to decide, whether it's how to do a scrum or how to run an entire enterprise, it brings everyone into a strategic mindset. And it forces them to start thinking about, all right, well, why are we here? And that's when reasons for being and principles and cultural tenets and things like that can really become a value when you create opportunities for people to look for them and lean into them. So I love it. It's hard, still hard, but I love it.
Well, and you know what? It is hard. And to go back to the point about being vulnerable, I think it is one of the most vulnerable things anybody can do is to say, how do we want to do this here? Yeah. Because not only do I have to then do it for myself, and each person in the conversation has to do it for themselves, they have to do it in the awareness of each other. And that's something that I call dimensional leadership, because the more awareness that we can hold, the better we can decide how.
Did you say demented leadership?
I did. Totally demented. Right? Isn't there a song about that? Fish heads, roly-poly fish heads. That's all that made me.
I don't know about that.
No, I do want to respond to that, Jess, because I do feel like that.
Hang on, before you do that, Steve, it was dimensional leadership. Now that I say it home to everybody from my childhood, I don't know who sang that song. It's probably somebody like Weird Al Yankovic. Dimensional leadership. Extras. Okay, there you go, Steve.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I do agree that it does take a serious amount of vulnerability for a leader to even invite people into the decision-making process. Yeah. Because so many times the C-suite believes that they have to have all the answers within themselves. Although I think many of the successful ones will relate that they say, I am successful because of my team and the people that I ask for. I think so I think that takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability, and I think, but I also think that there's so much credibility that a leader can get when they do open it up and say, I have, and I talk about this idea of being an architect of vision versus being a facilitator of vision. Being an architect says, I have it fully figured out. I've drawn the plans. I'm going to treat you as the contractor. Just build it. Versus a facilitator's one says, I don't have an idea of the exact destination, but I do have a very clear idea of the direction that we want to go. I want the team, I want the company to help give flesh to that. Yeah. And so I'm going to facilitate a process. One, yes, it's my job to have a vision in terms of a direction. But it's also my job to communicate to you what I think that looks like, but also communicate an invitation for you to be part of that process. And again, to your point, Mike, about, okay, then how are decisions made? People start to think, well, are you saying that it's going to be leadership by committee or leadership by consensus? No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you take different things into consideration. Yes, that leader has the final say, but they're informed by all of these things. And a lot of times people are okay with you not taking their idea. They just love the fact that you invited them to be heard, not with the ulterior motive of ultimately just dismissing everybody. I mean, there has to be an authentic desire to hear people out. Yeah. So I think, so when you exhibit that vulnerability of inviting people into that process of making decisions, or at least, let me put it this way, informing decisions, maybe that's a better term. Because ultimately it's going to be that leader that does make that decision.
I want to agree with that and disagree with that. Not disagree with the principle, but just share another way that things can go. Yeah. And I've got two stories to share. So the first one happened to me yesterday. I've been working with a very talented person to help reshape our website. And we just pushed the button on Friday for kind of a new look, new services, and all that stuff. And I thanked her profusely on Friday. She lives in another country, and it was just, I just really wanted to thank you so much for taking this so far. And then I was floored with what she said. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to grow. She actually had decision making. I kind of encouraged her repeatedly, because she's got a much better creative eye than I do, to just make the decisions and go. And I would be the one, like you said, who would provide those bumper guards for the bowling alley. So, this is what's on brand. This is what's not. This is how I want it to feel. But visual interpretation, how much text and pictures on a page, what pictures we use, as long as they don't break our principles, go for it. So I took myself out of the decisioning on that. And I'm not trying to show off. I'm just trying to show another thing. Now, there's somebody that did it really, really well. They were the one who, and this is from all of our pasts, and this guy was a visionary. He was able to see not in 3D, but in 20D. It was Disney. And his ideas went from, and I have a picture of his from 1957 where his business design showed everything from theme parks to magazines to comic books to films to theatrical to commercial merchandise, promo items, even to cruises and islands and all that stuff in 57. So
Yep.
he was famous for just going out there
Yeah.
and inciting his people to do these amazing things, but he didn't know how to do all of them.
Right.
But he could always correct. A friend of one last little thing, and then I'll give you the mic back. A friend of mine told me this story, and I don't know if it's true or not because I wasn't there. But Disney was at I think it was Disneyland, because he never saw Disney World open. I think he passed away before 71 when Disney World opened in my hometown of Orlando. But they were throwing out the first baseball game, the first baseball for the National Baseball Association. So Pluto goes out, to throw the first pitch. And Disney goes over to Pluto and he says, "So, Pluto, and what's your name?" Pluto wouldn't talk because they're trained not to talk. He said, "It's okay, I'm Walt Disney, you can talk to me." He says, "Well, sir, nice to meet you. I'm going to go throw the first pitch." And he goes, "You're not going to throw the first pitch. You're going to drop the ball. And then what are you going to do?" "Well, I'm going to pick it up and throw it." "No, you're going to kick the ball forward with those big ass shoes. All right, you're going to go chase it, and you're going to be Pluto. The ball is never going to cross the plate." So he was repeating what was that character's intent. He was keeping the magic and the story alive in that character. So he basically hijacked the entire beginning of the NBA game and turned it into a Disney commercial by giving that one person a little bit of guidance on character that they got to interpret.
Isn't that interesting? The words confidence and intention are coming up, I think. We were talking about vulnerability earlier, and I think actually confidence has a bigger place in this conversation, because to the point about what you were sharing and the true, clear intention that allows other people to bring their own vision or their own idea or their own concept to it, I think is incredibly important. It reminds me of Kenny Rogers' song, "The Greatest." Yeah, are you both familiar with that?
Mm-hmm.
Just a little. It's a little boy. I could sing. I could totally sing it, but I'm a horrible singer. So I am the greatest. And that's all I'm going to sing. But then it's about a little boy who's playing baseball, and he's playing by himself outside of his house. Mm-hmm. And he throws up the ball and he hits and he misses. And he throws up the ball and he hits and he misses. He throws up the ball, he hits and he misses. His mom calls him home and he says to himself, "I'm a great baseball player, but I had no idea that I could hit like that." Okay, so the whole song, I'm horrible at don't ever ask me to tell you about something because I will give away the ending. That's it. Our ability to recognize in ourselves through action, through deed, through interaction, through stepping back, through observing. Everything takes 2 weeks, right? give everything 2 weeks and just see. I think all of those come into this, and it allows not only each of us to be the greatest, but our teams to be the greatest, and our companies to be the greatest, which help our customers be the greatest.
Yeah. I think, Jess, you've got the two perfect people on this show. And here's why. What I'm realizing is that in this world where we're moving to continuous change, leaders have to be two new roles, and they need to learn these roles really well. They need to be the architects of the future and the storytellers that motivate people to build the future. You need both of those skills. You've got to have that clear vision that comes from an architect's eye, whether it's drawing a single line or it's detailing everything out like Disney did. And you've got to be able to tell the future from the point of view of you're already there, and this is what it means to you, and you do have a role in this company, and we need you to fill this. What do you think? How can you grow? What do you want to do? I think those are the two things leaders need to work on.
Well said.
And what would you add to that, Steve?
No, I don't know if I have much to add other than to maybe reiterate it in a different way. I do think that story in architecture, if you will, I call it in some cases cultural architecture, was the idea that came out of even the firm that I was at before. We were a national architecture company, and we described ourselves as, how do we tell your story in your space? And that literally came from the world of Disney. I mean, the principals that started the firm were former Disney, some were Imagineers, and some were others were just part of just Disney, the Disney company. And the idea of Walt Disney being able to take a two-dimensional story, which was at that time his animated movies, and say, I want the audience to be able to step in and participate and interact with that story. And that became a 3-dimensional story or a movie, and that was Disneyland. And so the idea of being able to take your cultural story and being able to tell it in not so much space, but the idea of being able to create the future of that, design what that looks like, and be able to communicate that is a powerful thing. So well said, Mike.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, everybody. This time went by so fast, and I just want to keep talking to these gentlemen. However, we have come to the end. So I want to challenge and suggest and encourage and request that each of you think about this question yourself. Constant change is our reality. How can businesses adapt? And more importantly, I want to know, as do Steve and Mike, how you are adapting and what are you bringing to the table. So don't forget, whether you go participate in the survey, great. Whether you add to the commentary here, awesome. Share that story, share that learning, because you have the opportunity then to be part of our community posts that we'll publish about this topic at the end of the month. All right. We all have things to learn. I know I'm not ready yet. I have one more thing to say. And then you can applaud. Wait, hold the applause. And then there's the mic drop. I'm kidding. That won't happen. All right. So if you found value being here, make sure to reach out and connect with Mike. Make sure and reach out to connect with Steve. And make sure to go subscribe to the Bold Business Podcast and take a look, take a listen, and leave a review. Until next time.